All right, today we're diving deep into a huge question about science itself. We're going to probe the very philosophy that shapes pretty much everything we think we know about the world.
So, what does science just assume is true before it even gets started? Now, a lot of people would probably say, nothing. Science is totally objective. But the truth, well, it's way more complex and honestly, a lot more controversial than you might think. You see, the standard view is that science works under this kind of practical, neutral ground rule. It's a rule that lets scientists do their job without getting all tangled up in these grand, ultimate claims about reality. You can think of it as a sort of philosophical truce. And this slide, it captures that popular idea perfectly. It's this neat little division of labor, right? Science handles the how questions, how gravity works, and it leaves the big why questions to philosophy and religion. It seems like a pretty simple way for everybody to get along. And listen, this isn't just some casual idea people toss around. As the philosopher Stephen Dilly points out, this principle, which we call methodological naturalism, is the established, 100%, the default view for so many scientists and intellectuals. It's basically the official story. But to really, really get to the bottom of this whole debate, we have got to get our definition straight. The entire conversation hinges on a critical distinction between two very different ideas that get confused all the time: methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism. And here it is, the core difference, side by side. On one hand, you have a rule for doing science, it's a practical tool. On the other, you have a complete belief system about all of reality, a worldview. One is a method, the other is a massive claim about existence itself. And that distinction is absolutely crucial. So let's break it down. Methodological naturalism, or MN for short, is basically the ground rules for playing the game of science. It says, look, for the purposes of our work, we're only going to look for and talk about natural explanations. And why is that? Well, because those are the only kinds of explanations we can actually test, observe, and measure. It's a pragmatic choice, just to keep science focused. Now, philosophical naturalism, or PN, is a much bigger, much bolder claim. This isn't a rule for a game. It's a statement about ultimate reality. It says that the natural world, the world of matter and energy and physical laws, is all there is. Full stop. Nothing else exists. Okay, so there you have it. That's the neat and tidy picture, right? Science uses the tool of MN, and that's totally separate from the worldview of PN. A scientist can use MN in the lab 9 to 5 and then be perfectly religious on a Sunday. But as you've probably guessed by now, some philosophers are saying, hang on, it is not nearly that simple. And this brings us to our first major critique. It's the argument that when these two naturalisms get mixed together, what you end up with is an intellectually rigged game. And here's the heart of Stephen Dilly's argument. What he's saying is, when someone who already believes in philosophical naturalism uses methodological naturalism as their rulebook for science, well, they create a system that basically guarantees their own worldview will always look like the winner. It becomes a self-confirming loop. Let's walk through this loop together. Step 1. A naturalist adopts the rule of only allowing natural causes. Step 2. That rule, by definition, automatically disqualifies any supernatural explanation right from the start. Step 3. This means a theistic idea can never be confirmed by science, doesn't matter what the evidence is. And then, step 4, anytime there's a gap in our knowledge, it's just assumed to be a natural cause we haven't found yet, which, you guessed it, just seems to confirm the initial worldview. Dilly's whole critique really boils down to this simple phrase. It becomes a game of heads I win, tails you lose. The rules have been set up in a way that one side of the argument is pretty much guaranteed to win, not because they have better evidence, but because of the rules they put in place before the game even started. But hold on, there's a second critique, and this one is even more radical. What if the problem isn't just how the two naturalisms get combined? What if the problem is methodological naturalism itself? What if science doesn't actually need to presuppose anything at all? Yeah, this line of thinking, coming from philosophers like Jonathan Fishman and Martin Boudry, argues that real science shouldn't have these artificial walls around it. They see it as this incredibly powerful toolkit for figuring out what's true, and it should be free to follow the evidence wherever it leads, without just ruling out entire categories of explanation before we even start looking. So what's in this universal toolkit? Well, they're powerful, content-neutral principles. We're talking about things like Bayesian reasoning. Adjusting how strongly we believe something as new evidence comes in. We've got Occam's razor. Always prefer the simplest explanation.
And of course, the core demands for real explanatory power and testability. The crucial thing is, none of these amazing tools care one bit if a hypothesis is labeled natural or supernatural.
And this really gets to their main point. The scientific value of an idea shouldn't depend on what you call it, but on its virtues. Does it make specific predictions? Is it simple? Does it explain the data well? According to them, these are the questions science should be asking of any hypothesis that comes along. So, this brings us right to the heart of the matter. If we ditch the artificial labels, what actually makes an explanation good or scientific in the first place?
You know, a truly powerful explanation is one that achieves something we might call data compression. It takes a huge amount of messy, complex data about the world and boils it all down into a simple, elegant, and predictive model. So from this point of view, an explanation like God did it isn't rejected because it's supernatural, it's rejected because it's just a terrible explanation. It compresses zero data and it has absolutely no predictive power.
This table just lays out the contrast perfectly. A weak explanation is vague. It explains everything, which means it actually predicts nothing. A strong explanation like Newton's laws is incredibly precise, simple, and makes sharp predictions that you can go out and test. This is the real standard of science, and a lot of supernatural claims just fail to meet that standard on purely logical ground.
Okay, so let's just do a quick recap of the two huge challenges we've looked at. First, you have the internal critique from Dilly, who says the game is rigged when you combine MN and PN. Then you have the external critique from Fishman and Boudry, who say, hey, let's just get rid of these special rules entirely and let science's universal tools evaluate every claim on a level playing field.
So what does all this mean? It means that the simple, clean story we started out with, the idea that science is just this neutral tool that happens to support a naturalistic worldview, that whole picture starts to look like a philosophical illusion. The real relationship is way more tangled and complicated than it first appears.
And this leaves us with a final, really provocative question to think about. Is science a tool with a strictly limited job, designed only to study the natural world? Or is it something much, much grander? A universal toolkit for checking out any claim about reality, with the power to follow the evidence no matter where it might lead? The answer to that question really defines not just science, but the entire scope of human knowledge.